So, Melissa, it's great to be back with you. We were just already diving right in because it's been really fun to see the reaction to the comic book graphic novel episode of the podcast. And so we want to talk about that for a minute as we get into today's topic. So share with me what you were thinking. Why do you think people were so taken with the comic book episode?
When you told me what kind of response it was getting, I've been thinking about it all day, and it occurred to me, like, everything right now, I think, feels really hard for everybody.
Yeah.
And anything that feels like it might bring some ease into any aspect of our lives is something we're just all hungry for. So when I'm thinking about like homeschooling my kids, anything where I feel like there's an intersection between what they're enthusiastic about, what they can't get enough of, that also supports my own aspirations for them as their primary educator, that serves them educationally. It feels like, that's something I want to hear more about.
There are a couple ways to think about school subjects and hobbies. One is, I think there are certain subjects where we would never mind seeing a child develop an obsession. Like, I call these the prestige subjects. Like, I can't imagine a parent saying, my child is obsessed with poetry. I've got to limit poems. My child will not stop practicing the violin. It's really annoying me that all they want to do is play violin. Like,
it's the definition of humble brag.
Yeah, right. I've never heard someone say, I wish my child would not learn all the open strategies for chess, right? There is a certain prestige we attach to certain school subjects. And so when we see a child develop a passion for them, we actually feel proud of the passion. And like you said, I love that humble brag. We brag about it, There's a difference between saying my child just made the ballet company versus my child is in a hip hop dance team. It has a different impact. If your child is reading like classic works of fiction versus comic books, superhero graphic novels. So one of the things that hit me about the comic books is that is not a prestige subject. That would fall more into the entertainment category. And we automatically devalue entertainment. Entertainment is the reward you give yourself after you've worked hard at math or after you've followed through on your science project, right? And so what we did is we elevated comic books by endowing them with some kind of academic value that we just automatically give to prestige subjects without needing that extra support. Does that make sense?
Right. You don't have to lay out all of the merits and learning objectives met by reading a novel.
Right. Or studying some subject like, my child got really fascinated with weather patterns and how weather is measured. We'd be proud of that. But the same child who is understanding how to design a video game, it doesn't quite have that same impact. It feels like it's, not as meaningful.
Right. It feels more like, as you said, an entertainment. And if it's a part of pop culture, we devalue pop culture, which is hilarious to me because pop culture is current culture.
Yes.
It's our culture. In 100 years, 200 years, 500 years, pop culture becomes history and cultural significance. And it's what you study when you study ancient literature or anthropology.
Gosh, I mean, that is so true. It reminds me of the first time that I read Northanger Abbey by Jane Austen. And that book is a rollicking hilarity to me, especially if you've read any other Gothic novels because she's mocking it. But there's this opening section where one of the characters, who's a man, is really looking down on women for reading novels. They're supposed to be reading like these science encyclopedia type books, right? Everything nonfiction, everything definitional, everything scientific. And he's making fun of her for this lowbrow fiction. But of course, it's all fiction we teach in literature classes now. It's the Bronte sisters. Like it's real literature in our view, right? So there was even a time when novels were sort of treated the way we might see comic books and graphic novels today, like twaddle.
It's true. It's true. Many of our current classic novels were not classics in the day when they were published, and they were looked down upon because they weren't the classics.
That's right. And so I started really reflecting on this comic book challenge. Like, what are people looking for? What are they thinking about when they're thinking about their kids' education? And the language that came back to me was that kids and adults and everyone is looking, we're all looking for meaning. And it made me want to pull out this book by the Canes. Some of you will remember Renata and Jeffrey Cain. They are researchers that I cited quite a bit in The Brave Learner and back when I was doing my Periscopes and YouTube videos, because they have a whole philosophy of what they would call brain-based education, like actually understanding how the brain works before we start teaching. And so a bunch of concepts kind of came up today, and then we've got several questions that I want to explore with you, Melissa. I sent them to her in advance from the book that I think will help you start to flesh out, like, how are you delivering this education to your kids? So here's a definition I want to start with. It's, what is deep meaning? Why do we care about having meaningful lives, not just information in, information out, right? Or what some people call GIGO, garbage in, garbage out. All right. So deep meaning, what we live for. Deep meaning refers to whatever drives us and governs our sense of purpose. It includes all the instincts embedded in our reptilian brains, from survival and territoriality to nesting and flocking. It includes our needs for social relationships and an emotionally rich life. And it includes our intellectual and spiritual needs. Maslow expressed something of the range of deep meanings with his hierarchy of needs. And because so many factors compete for expression and because people are so different, George Kelly suggested that we simply talk of individual constructs. So basically what they're getting at is that drives are sources of individual meaning, and they are what people live for. And they are meaningful regardless of whether they are articulated or whether they are conscious. And so the Canes prefer the chosen term deep meanings. People access passion when deep meanings are engaged.
Wow. Yes. It seems to me like that's at the heart of the question that kids will often ask. Why do I need to know that?
There you go. That is exactly the question. And when we ask, why do I need to know that? Part of what the Canes say is happening is that kids are building constructs for what will become natural knowledge. And I really love this. There's a distinction that they make between teaching our children for expertise versus mastery. And I think those two terms are really interesting in educational theory. When we talk about mastery, we're usually talking about some form of memorization, some form of content consumption, right? We're going to master the parts of speech. So your child is going to memorize them and be able to identify them when they see them. Expertise is not mastery. Expertise is understanding the role of those terms, how they fit together in the larger schema of language, not just grammar for a moment. This is very much the way Brave Writer thinks about expertise.
Right.
But how do we develop a natural knowledge framework around grammar? Yesterday, a mom wrote to me, and she's been using the DART program, which Melissa writes, right? So I think you'll be very delighted to hear this. And they were reading a completely different book, not one of the DART books. And the daughter stopped her. She's 9 years old. And she said, "Mom, that was hyperbole." And the mom was like, oh my gosh, she spotted hyperbole in the middle of being read to. I want you to think about how many layers that really is. You're listening for the story, right? You're just going along listening to the story. Your mom's reading aloud to you. And suddenly your schema for grammar and literary devices that has been cultivated as a natural knowledge base. It's got an architecture for what these literary elements do, how they function, their relationship to the telling of a story, not just mastery. I know the definition, I got it right on a test, but
Right.
like a level of expertise where hyperbole now functions as knowledge she can call up at any time. That happened while she was listening to a story. It wasn't during the time when the mom was quizzing her. That's what we mean by educating for meaning and expertise. Isn't that beautiful?
That is such an exciting example. That's real facility with the idea. It means not just the definition of a term has been relegated to long-term memory, but facility with the idea and an awareness and attentiveness so that her ears perked up when she heard an example. And then there's that like element of discovery and excitement because you caught it.
Exactly. And she felt free to express it because it was natural to her. She wasn't performing it to get some kind of credit with a teacher or with a parent.
Right.
She was actually revealing something that she had found meaningful. And this is why I think deep meanings is a really important topic for education. We spend so much time trying to think about how do I get my child to fill in the blank, complete the worksheet, sit still, understand math, read correctly, write on a page. But have we connected it to the building of their natural knowledge, to their sense of purpose and passion? One of the things that the Canes say in this book is they say educators have often avoided dealing with deep meanings because they involve passion and the apparent absence of logic. However, there is obviously more to life and to understanding that what has traditionally been regarded as rational. What educators and the community need to acknowledge is that these meanings are operating constantly in students, parents, teachers, administrators, and other people who influence education. We do not consider them mysterious. The process of uncovering such meanings is not fraught with danger, nor can it be programmed. On the contrary, our individual deep meanings contribute to our interpretation of events and experiences, regardless of what others intend.
Wow.
And so the problem we have is that we aren't paying attention to the meanings kids are creating. So they're going to create them regardless. So they can either be sort of involved in this passion and architecture of their natural knowledge, what feels like common sense and familiarity, or they can actually develop a deep meaning that is alienating of the topic. Like I developed a story as a child that I was not good at math because of a traumatic math experience. And that became a deeper, meaningful script for me than any strategy for getting me to master math. Nobody went back and helped me deconstruct the meaning I made. I had to defend against this. I started saying, I'm bad at math. Math is not my thing. I'm not good at math. That became the deep meaning I attached to math. It was absent of logic, but it was absolutely my truth.
This is so fascinating for me to think through, Julie. One of my kids was sort of going down that same road of shaping for herself that story about her relationship to math. And she was about 8 years old. And I recognized, like for me at that time, it was so important to me that whatever I did was to keep this like spark of joy in learning alive. And I know that was really how I was oriented. So I parked what we had been doing with math. And I was like, well, we're just going to play a lot of games for a while. And this is the child that I've told this story about how we started playing this video game called Harvest Moon. And she got so into tracking the economic value of various crops, how much the seeds cost, what their growing season was, what you could sell them for. Did they grow once or repeat? You know, could you harvest more than once? She was doing quite complex math because it mattered to her.
That's right. That's exactly it. And so what she was doing is she was finding a way to take the mathematical concepts and embed them in an architecture of meaning, the landscape of this natural knowledge. And what the Canes contend then is that our primary task as educators is to expand natural knowledge. And I want to read you, I know I'm doing a lot of reading, but you know, they just say it better than me. Natural knowledge is what we have come to call second nature. It results when information, felt meaning, and deep meaning come together. The learner has acquired a felt meaning for the subject or concept or procedure so that new information and procedures fit together. This is what you're describing with the game. In addition, there is a sufficient connection with the learner's interests or deep meaning so that the information and procedures are personally relevant.
Right, right. So there's hooks. We've talked about how we have sought out ways to give our kids hooks for hanging other knowledge on. But those hooks aren't just like boring, coat rack hooks on the wall. They're meaningful from the get-go. You're making me think of, you tell me if this is on track for what you're talking about. I'm reminded of when my youngest son, who's now 16, was literally 3 years old, and we were visiting relatives, and he picked up my sister's iPad and started playing Angry Birds for the first time. And within, a very short while, he had mastered the physics of that game. Now, he had no language for the physics of that game, but it was a sort of, like calculating arc and how, how fast you were going to make the bird fly. And he broke my sister's very hard-earned high score within hours.
I love that.
Now, he got older, right? And when we did start exploring those concepts of physics, he immediately had this callback in his mind to Angry Birds. Oh, right. It's like when.
Exactly.
And is that what you're saying?
That's exactly right. So what I love to say everything can teach anything and anything can teach everything because, Charlotte Mason talks about education being a science of relations. The Keynes talk about education being a series of interconnections. And what we're saying when we talk about hooks and passion and deep learning, what we're really saying is until the subject area is meaningful to the current schema of a child's natural knowledge, it will feel irrelevant and not worth learning.
Right. So the answer to why do I need to know that becomes, for so many of us, well, because it'll be on the test, because you need to know it to get the grade.
Correct. But that is not meaningful to a child.
Right.
That might be deeply meaningful to the parent, though. Remember, they said parents have their own deep meaning, and our deep meaning is responsibility, the feeling that we must give them the education they deserve, the fear that we will be judged harshly for not delivering that education. So our motivation to do the parenting, educating successfully makes us apply the tools and schemas that we think will achieve that goal. But that's often at cross purposes with a child's learning.
Julie, it strikes me this is the answer to the question you posed about why did that comics episode land? It's because it was a meeting of the meanings.
Yes. Brilliant. Yes.
Wow. I love that we often have done, considerable prep work before we head into a discussion. This one, we hit upon this topic today, and I'm sharing with our listeners because I want them to know I am like learning and responding in real time.
That's
just
amazing.
As you, the listener,
yes,
are doing. And it's very exciting to me, this process of being presented with ideas and making connections. So you see the exact process that Julie's describing is happening for me in the moment. I'm making meaning for myself out of the concepts that you, Julie, are presenting.
That's amazing. I mean, I absolutely love that. And I've read this book multiple times, and it's funny how it strikes you differently. Any book you read more than once, you start to hear the words differently each time. There's one example in here about kids and computers. And since computers are always like a topic where it's not really a prestige subject yet, it's still in the entertainment category, I thought this might be interesting as the example. One example is a young child who masters computers easily. The information consists of the parts, the hardware and software, together with a range of procedures. For many children, all those ingredients are like any other game that has to be mastered. There is a frame of reference, a technological game played with friends that enables them to rapidly acquire a sense or felt meaning for how everything is connected. And underlying the entire process is a set of drives, ranging from competitiveness to the desire to be a part of a group, that give purpose and a deeper degree of organization to what is being done. In practice, natural knowledge is acquired by increasing the number and quality of interconnections in the brain that natural knowledge is acquired. And so, what we're really saying is the brain is designed to perceive and generate patterns. And by noticing those features and those patterns and participating in it, they develop a set of natural categories where they put the information they're learning. So if we think about a student learning how to play an instrument, for instance, part of the reason that process is so different than like learning how to do abstract math is that there's an instrument in your hand.
Right.
Like imagine if you were being taught how to play the saxophone without a saxophone. You're
like
literally
in, the Music Man.
Yes, where you're literally being taught how to read notes, but you're not you're not hearing them played, you're not fingering the instrument, you're not experiencing the pacing. You're just being told over and over, this is the pace, this is what the note means, this is how you draw it on the page. Now I want you to do the same thing in the key of F, and you're switching from the key of A. And it's all this like hard transposition work, but it has no meaning. Because there's been no music, nothing in your hand, nothing that makes that schema come to life. And so much of what we beat our heads about with children is getting them to do abstract work that has no basis in experience. And it is only through experience that we generate deep meaning.
Gosh, this resonates with anybody who has ever handed a child a recorder and said, now hold on, let me show you. And they don't want to hold on, they want to blow.
That's exactly right. In fact, when we did the Suzuki method with Katrin for the violin, the first 6 weeks, they weren't allowed to hold an actual violin. They were using like an empty juice box and like a little strings that you threaded on it. It was so unrelated. It made no noise. And they're like, you're not allowed to touch the violin. And she got very frustrated. And so we finally found a teacher that said, yes, you can touch the violin, like from the beginning. There was something very weird about that process. Now, I'm not knocking Suzuki. A lot of people really love it. But there is something about this connectivity. I have often said the reason kids really love computers is it feels like they're driving an adult car, a machine, right? And similarly, part of the reason that graphic novels and comic books are so enticing is actually the complexity level. We think it's easier, but it's actually requiring more cognitive demand than reading words on a page. You're having to decipher the images, the sequence, who's speaking to who, applying intonation. Like you're actually processing a lot more data. And there is something about complexity that drives meaning. That's the other piece that we often forget. We like the texture, the tactile, the challenging data. That Charlotte Mason and Ruth Beechick, another educational hero of mine, Maria Montessori, a lot of times they talk about how readers that are teaching kids to read are so boring that kids don't have the motivation to even decode. And a big joke with my daughter, Katrin, is the thing that really broke reading open for her. She was like 9 years old. She wanted to understand why Nick Lachey and Jessica Simpson broke up. And it pushed her over the edge to reading this People magazine article. You know, she was very unmotivated by all the little Bob books I had.
I feel like we have stories about that for multiple of our children. My third kid, it was comics who taught her how to read.
Love that.
We had these collections of Tintin or Showcase Presents, which Showcase Presents were these big collections of superhero comics put out by DC from the 1950s. And when they were reprinted, they were black and white editions, right? And on newsprint. I mean, these weren't like full color, easy to enter.
Right.
And she was fascinated by them, and she wanted to learn to read so that she could see what they were saying.
I'm thinking about how if we really want kids to form their own relationship, and by the way, the deep meanings they generate will not match an adult's sensibilities, right?
Right.
The deep meanings they're generating for themselves are related to the schema that they currently have. Our big job is to keep expanding these various categories of information that they can use to fill in the blanks and generate meaning. So I want to talk to you about my brand new book that's coming out April 15th. But I notice I have like this twinge of reluctance. And I was trying to pinpoint where it was coming from, and this is what I realized. This is my fourth book I've told you about. And so there's a bit of a difference between announcing my very first book and the fourth one. It's sort of like the difference between saying, hey, I'm pregnant for the first time, and everyone throws you a shower and buys you gifts. And by the fourth kid, you're like, I'm pregnant. It's my fourth baby. And everyone's like, good for you. But here's the funny thing about this particular book. It really is the culmination of everything I've worked on for 25 years in Brave Writer. My publisher came to me and said, Julie, don't you want like a book, a book that can be checked out off of a library shelf, a book that can be purchased and listened to while you're washing dishes or taking a walk? And I realized that's true. It would be nice to create something that could outlive me, that wasn't just curriculum, but could help parents of kids who are in school as well, not just the homeschooling community. And then I wondered, well, what would be the angle I should take for that project? And I suddenly knew. If I think about the number one complaint of kids around writing, it's this. They say, I hate writing. And that's when I knew I had it. This book is called Help, My Kid Hates Writing. And my goal is to transform both the experience of your young writer and your experience coaching them in writing. I know you're going to like it because I tried to make it interesting to read. I have humor, examples, and a lot of information that you won't get from our Brave Writer curriculum. There's a whole chapter on AI. There is a lot of attention paid to healing the damage that writing instruction in its traditional format cause to adults and kids. So thanks for pre-ordering, especially in hardback, which helps the book make bestseller lists. Wouldn't that be cool to have a book written by someone in the home education space actually show up on one of those bestseller lists? I'd be amazed if that ever occurred, but I'd love it to happen. So thank you. You can order this book anywhere books are sold, but we will include a link in the show notes to my brand new author website. I figured by the time I had a fourth book, I probably needed a website as an author. So you can take a look at that as well. Thanks again for all your support over the years. I hope this book helps you, helps your cousins, helps your best friends, helps the lady that is the writing coach that you hired to help your kid. Thanks for pre-ordering. Make sure you hang on to your receipt. We have some pre-order bonuses coming that you won't want to miss, and I'll share about those soon. Again, it's Help, My Kid Hates Writing, How to Turn Struggling Students into Brave Writers. Go to juliebogartwriter.com. So one of the ways that I remember this happening for my kids is when we were studying something that was very abstract and not related to them, like let's say ancient history or World War II or something that just was historical and out of their direct experience. We did a lot of tracing. Did you do this, Melissa? We would get these Dorling Kindersley books, DK books, that would have like swords or tanks or rifles or whatever, and we would get tracing paper, and Noah and I would lay on our stomachs. I would do it with him, and we would trace the drawings instead of just reading the book. We slowed it way down. We were tracing the actual weaponry, and it's really weird how just the act of tracing it, drawing it with your own hand, highlights aspects of what you're seeing that you wouldn't see if you're just looking at the pages.
I so get that. I'm writing this book where a main character is a pig. And so I'm drawing pigs and I'm embroidering pigs so that I can learn all the shapes of a pig.
Okay, that's incredible. I love that you have that happening in your life right now, right? Because here you are, a grown up. You already have your education. You know how to look up information about pigs.
Right.
So, Melissa, let me just point the question even harder at you. What led you to start drawing and embroidering them? What are you hoping to get from that you couldn't get from Wikipedia about pigs?
I want to know them better with my hands. And ideally, I would be raising a pig. That's not going to happen in my urban neighborhood. Although it's Portland, there was a pig down the block for a while. That pig moved, unfortunately for me, right now. It's a tangible way, and it's a way of looking at this animal differently. I started embroidering these animals. It's this series that I made called Endlings. An endling is the last of its kind, like the last individual of a species before it goes extinct.
Wow.
And I started embroidering this little bramble K rat that was on this island north of Australia. By the time I finished drawing it and having a drawing I was satisfied with and then stitching it, they had gone extinct. They were no longer, just down to a few. They were gone.
Wow.
And that experience of stitching like individual strands of fur taught me that I can see. It's like that poem, the Wallace Stevens 13 Ways of Looking at a Blackbird.
Oh, wow.
Is it 13?
I don't know that poem.
Oh, it's wonderful. Okay, we have to pull that one up.
Okay. Yeah, let's
maybe
link to it.
Maybe you could share it on Instagram or something.
Yeah, we can link to it.
I want to see my subject, this pig, from multiple angles. I mean, it's as basic as that.
Well, and that is what the richness of education is. But if we're in a hurry for mastery, if we're always measuring by quantity, we're missing the opportunity to create those interconnections. And it is the interconnections that create the deep meaning. And deep meaning is what we live for. That is what the studies and science have shown.
That's
we live for deep meaning. So for a 5-year-old, deep meaning is going to be very different than a 15-year-old or a 45-year-old. You have to keep that in mind. Telling a 5-year-old that their deep meaning should be mastering this school subject because they're in kindergarten is not the meaningful container for them. They are going to be interested for a whole different set of reasons. And sometimes those seem illogical. They seem playful. They seem frivolous. They seem unimportant. That's what we're being told by the Canes. Let that go. Connect to the meaning that they're generating because that's where the learning happens.
I'm laughing because I keep thinking of examples of when this played out in the life of one of my children. I'm thinking about when one of my kids was maybe 4 years old, and a friend was like in a preschool class, and they were learning how to cut. They were learning scissors, and the mom was telling me about it, and I was like, "Oh, that's so funny." This child just cut all of the hair off of her favorite stuffed cat. She learned scissors, like in a way that was lifelong meaning.
But it is like that too, right? Cause and effect, and learning what happens when you use scissors and that it's irreversible. Like, what child doesn't have a story in their family of someone cutting their bangs or cutting their own hair? Find out the meaning of scissors through the experience, not someone cautioning you away from ever using them. When parents say to me, how do I regulate screens? How do I regulate computers? Give them something interesting to do that is as compelling as a computer.
Bingo. There it is.
The answer isn't regulation, it's stimulation. It's what can you give a child that is interesting and compelling? Not how can I prevent them from the most interesting thing how can I prevent them from playing with the most interesting thing in the room? That is not the question to be asking.
That's right. What can we make more interesting in their world?
I want to go through this checklist of useful questions with you, Melissa, and if you want to trade with me and share the ones that struck you. But one of the questions you can ask yourself when you are helping a child learn, when you're engaged in this act, ask yourself, are your students involved and challenged.
Oh, earlier when you were talking about the importance of being challenged, you reminded me of all of the writings on flow. On achieving a flow state, which is the most satisfying kind of focus that humans have figured out how to do when you're so immersed that you're not even aware of time passing. And they've determined, neuroscientists have determined, that there's a sweet spot. It's when it's not too easy and it's not too hard.
Exactly. And your child knows what that is. And you'll know it because if it's too easy, they get bored. And if it's too hard, they cry. Or they don't want to do it, or they say it's
That's right.
stupid.
Or they're restless and they start poking their sibling.
That's exactly right. So a good example of this, so let's take something practical. Like let's say you've been doing copy work all year. It's March. They're getting bored, right? They know what copy work is. It feels the same routine. So the question you're asking yourself is, are they involved or are they challenged? Let's say they have been involved, but they're starting to dwindle in their energy. And maybe they're pretty good now at handwriting. They've been doing it since September, right? So now the question is for you to ask, how could I challenge this child? And I remember with Katrin, one of the things we did is we ordered all these American Girl lettering books. And we started just doing these like bubble letters, letters with pumpkins on them, letters that had flourishes. We just changed the challenge level of copy work. I've shared before with Johanna, we actually made our own paper and bound our own book. We upped the challenge level. Can you think of an example of where you upped the challenge level of something that had become too routine?
Oh, this is a good question. Well, oh, yes. Okay. So at a point in time when I had 2 kids in high school, and we had been reading a lot of history, and we had gotten to a point where like there was too much historical knowledge for any of us to hold in our heads. And I remembered that we had this board game called Chronology, which has this deck of cards, and each card has a historical event. And the game is like you draw a card and you put it down, and you have to put it like, does it go between these 2 other cards that are already on the table? You're trying to put them in chronological order. I couldn't find our game, Julie, when I wanted it for this key moment with my kids. So I got index cards, and we just started making our own cards for things that we had already learned about. And week after week, I mean, my kids will tell you this is one of the most fun and fertile periods homeschooling ever was for us, because it became such a game. It became a little bit of a competition for them. I would put down like 15, 16. Sometimes I would put the event, and sometimes I'd turn it over to the year. I had, on the flip side of the card, I would write the year, and they would yell out the event, or they would yell out the year. And that card deck grew with us. We still have it. And as I'm saying it, I need to go pull it out for the 2 who are in high school now. Okay,
that is the most perfect example of what I'm talking about. So instead of mastery, like here's a test, A goes with B, I'm drawing lines, or I'm answering A, B, C, or D. You're actually asking them to put historical events in the context of the architecture they've been building for world events. And they're determining it. They're not only writing them down, which means they're putting them in their own language on these cards, right? Not somebody else doing it for them. They're writing about the Boxer Rebellion in their own words. And then they're trying to relate it to other events that are already in their schema, but maybe aren't perfectly firm yet. And so there is going to be a memory that gets associated with the tactile experience of laying those cards down, and then even getting it wrong, which, by the way, is a key way we learn. Yes. And then you move it to its right place. That is more likely to stick with you, actually, according to the research, than even putting it in the right place to begin with.
That's absolutely true, as my Welsh teacher is constantly saying.
That's right. And so when you said that, that started making me think of all the ways that we've tried to do these sort of tactile things in our family. This is why nature journaling is so powerful. You're sitting outside and you are requiring yourself to observe enough to record something on paper with a pencil. It's not just disappearing past your eyes.
Right.
We made a graph one time of one branch of leaves in our front yard to track how many fell each day. So we would get up each day and we would populate this bar graph day by day based on how many leaves fell to see if the rate of the leaves falling increased over a period of a few weeks, which of course it did. But we actually had it in graphing form.
Right.
That is very different than saying, let's talk about the fact that in the fall, leaves fall.
Julie, I have one from your family.
Oh,
because I stole it for a quill.
Oh, what was that?
Do you remember doing something with the planets when you and your kids were figuring out how far apart the planets were? What did you do?
Well, we met at the end of our cul-de-sac with other homeschooled kids. And then we had gotten this, like, I don't know where we got it, but it was some kind of PDF file that told us, like, it reduced the distance of the planets to how you could stand apart certain feet, certain inches, certain feet to represent all the planets. And then we discovered that for the child to be Pluto, they'd have to be 2 miles away. And, everybody else was like within eye shot, but we couldn't send Pluto 2 miles away from us. And it really brought home just how big the universe is from just that experience. Yeah.
The funny thing is, talk about making meaning. When I used that activity in a quill, I was picturing my neighborhood for the relative distances. So when I picture your children going out into the neighborhood, they're standing on my streets.
I love that. Well, and that's just the thing. Like, our job is to detect what would be meaningful to them. So here's another question you can ask yourself. Is there clear evidence of student creativity and enjoyment? Are students dealing appropriately with dissonance? Ooh. I have a fabulous example of this. I've shared before that we did a gold rush party with my kids for 4th grade when Noah was living in California when we were all there. And so we created this whole, like, pan for gold kind of toddler sandbox, right? And we put fool's gold in it, and we had a hose, and we had these pie tins we had punctured, and we were like panning for gold. And we had wood and the ability to make a sluice. So you could actually put all the dirt in the sluice, run water over it, and supposedly get more gold faster. So it was really interesting. The boys gravitated to the sluice because it required sawing and hammering and nails. But the girls immediately, I don't know why, but they just had this sudden awareness that it would be a lot faster to just pan for the gold. So they get in there and they are suddenly yelling every 2 seconds, Eureka, Eureka, we've got gold. And the boys are getting frustrated because it's taking them so long to build this sluice. And they're having this dissonant experience. And all of a sudden they abandoned the sluice and went and grabbed pans. And one of the moms said, oh my gosh, it's just like the gold rush. The second they saw that there was a faster way to get gold, they abandoned what they were doing. And and that's an example of dealing appropriately with dissonance.
Right. Their lived experience conflicted with an idea that they held going in.
Right. And they were able to adjust to make this a more successful experience. And that's what that means. So if you have a child who is, let's say, struggling with spelling or struggling with a math concept, to have them deal with that dissonance appropriately means they're interested enough to overcome it. Right? This is one of the reasons we do in Brave Writer this sort of let your kid be the first one to edit their own writing so that they deal with the dissonance. They get to decide, is this spelled correctly or not? They're looking to correct their own work. That is so different than having an adult come in and tell you what you did wrong. Right?
That's so true. Yes. And I think when we give them passages from books that they have read, and we've messed it up, we've done violence to the passage, as you say, removing punctuation, misspelling words, taking out capital letters, they see it, they notice it, and that dissonance, they get to be the editor and they find out why those rules are in place in the first place.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a fantastic example. Perfect. Another thing that you can ask yourself when you're trying to identify if there's deep meaning happening for them while they're learning, are students being exposed to content in many ways that link content to life? And this is where homeschoolers really excel, right? If you're working on fractions, please tell me you're making pizza. Make sure that you are baking, using measuring cups. Like this shouldn't be hard for homeschoolers, but sometimes they need the reminder that real life is a fantastic teacher. And I just want to underscore the power of doing it slowly. Like, our job isn't to master things quickly, it's to patiently be a part of a journey. That's why I said tracing instead of just reading is powerful, because it's slowing you down. Nature journaling is powerful, not just walking through the creek, but sitting and observing the creek long enough to draw it with your own hand. Do you have other examples of that, linking content to life?
I'm thinking so much about how that is very easy and organic, I think, for a lot of us when our kids are young. And then we have to figure out ways to do it as they get older, and the pressures change a little bit. We've got some ideas about academic success in our head, and we're wanting to keep doors open to them.
Yes.
And we're still searching, because we're homeschoolers committed to this sort of organic, joyful learning.
Right.
We're searching for ways to bring that meaning into their experience. And I think once they're teenagers, part of our job is to sit back and listen to them and give them space to figure out how they can link content to life in meaningful ways themselves.
I love that emphasis, because I do think parents sometimes do too much for kids. Like, we can give them lots of opportunities, but they will make their own connections. Their deep meanings, again, may look illogical to you or not that deep or meaningful. But a child who's 8, I'll never forget this. Jacob was like 10 or 11, and we had bought him these colorful dominoes from Heartsong. And he spent days setting them up in as many intricate patterns that he could knock over as possible. Someone might say that's just pointless. What's the point of that activity? It's just a game. It's just play. He's never going to use it again for the rest of his life. But there is something happening. It's the discipline of follow through. It's testing and seeing the effect of your ideas. It's the patience and discipline to redo it again after you accidentally knock it over. These are sort of the intangible, meaningful skills that he was acquiring. And it would be very easy to treat that like it was a distraction from school subjects, right? Deep meaning comes from within. Just the challenge of, can I do it, is meaningful to a lot of kids. Can I shoot 100 free throws in a row without missing one?
That attentiveness too. I mean, in a time when we are all struggling to hold on to any shreds of attention and attentiveness that we have in a world just beset with distractions.
True.
Any kid who can be that absorbed in patiently setting up dominoes, or you've reminded me of a time a mom friend of mine was complaining to me. She was really distressed. She said, all my son wants to do, he was a teenager, maybe 13, 14. All he wants to do is listen to the Lord of the Rings on audiobook, and he's building this like scale model of Helm's Deep. And I said, play that back in your head. Do you hear what you just said?
Yes. Oh my gosh, so absolutely accurate. I remember when we lived in our little condo in California and we had no backyard. We just had like a side patio with like a little foot strip of dirt around the patio, right? So we're not talking optimal place for growing anything. We grew sunflowers and watched them bloom in just the corner. My kids made an elaborate like road in the dirt for their little cars and some tunnels in this very tiny patch of land. Does that mean anything? It's a great question. Is it just play? Is it just dirt? Does it matter? But whenever you see your kids sustaining interest, there is something that's being learned. It's sometimes invisible to you. And it matters to create space for that to continue to happen. I had this experience as a kid where we used to play Barbies, and we would make these elaborate houses where we would take books and turn them sideways to make the rooms. And we would fill up my whole bedroom. And I used to use this one photo album as like a dance floor. And then I had this piano jewelry box that, you lift the lid and it has a ballerina and it sings, but it was a piano. So there'd be like a dance hall, and then we would have a place where they would eat. And the whole time we were building, we were talking about what we would do with our Barbies once these homes were done. And not once did we play with the Barbies in the homes. Not once. We would get to the end of this masterful home,
right?
And then we were done. And the whole game was building the home. It was imagining what could happen in these rooms. And if I think back on that, it was just a work of imagination, a tiny, tiny bit of design and engineering, but mostly it was social conversation around imagining what life is. And we had a mechanism for doing it. This is the kind of play that's being lost today. And parents are so busy scheduling all the activities and making sure that they count for something instead of allowing these deep, meaningful parts of a child to emerge.
That's true. I think we really lost something when the phrase enrichment activity sort of entered contemporary thinking about how best to parent. Oh, we want to offer them lots of enrichment activities, as if we have to take everything that's organic to childhood.
Exactly.
And grown-upify it.
That's right. In fact, I think the best way to sum up this whole concept is that we don't just want our kids to be able to think. We want them to be able to care. We want them to care about what they're learning, to think and to care. And so whenever you start to notice this waning energy in your homeschool, return to some of the questions that we brought up today. Another good one is, are there social connections around this topic? My kids did much better in a biology co-op class than they would have done just at home with me. So finding that's another meaningful way. Kids in their teens like to learn together. There's something about the social cohesion of that group that motivates the homework, motivates showing up, motivates performing. So it isn't always that you're going to okay, well, they have to learn biology, so we're going to crossbreed fish in the creek. I know that sounds, some families do that, but a lot don't. But there are ways to help your kids experience learning as meaningful that are not just related to the subject, but to the way that they are constructing meaning in their lives right now at this stage and age of development.
That's right. That's right. When I wanted to really get into Shakespeare with my kids, I started a Shakespeare club where other kids would come and we could act out scenes together.
Exactly. That's 100% it. I think it would be great. Let's end with this quote by Carl Rogers. I just think it's so apropos. And then we look forward to hearing from you. Send us text messages or comment on Instagram so that we can serve you well in this podcast. Okay, so here's what Carl Rogers, the great psychologist, had to say about this kind of learning. If the purpose of teaching is to promote learning, then we need to ask what we mean by that term. Here, I become passionate. I want to talk about learning, but not the lifeless, sterile, futile, quickly forgotten stuff that is crammed into the mind of the poor, helpless individual tied into his seat by ironclad bonds of conformity.
Tell us what you really think.
Yeah, come on, Carl. Don't hold back. I am talking about learning, the insatiable curiosity that drives the adolescent boy to absorb everything he can see or hear or read about gasoline engines in order to improve the efficiency and speed of his cruiser. I am talking about the student who says, I am discovering drawing in from the outside and making that which is drawn in a real part of me. I am talking about any learning in which the experience of the learner progresses along the line. No, that's not what I want. Wait, this is closer to what I am interested in, what I need. Ah, here it is. Now I'm grasping and comprehending what I need and what I want to know.
Oh, so good and so meaningful to me.
Same. It just makes me want to go play with my grandkids. Yesterday, I went to a birthday party for one of my grandkids, and they had the game Hot Potato, and all the kids were 5 and under. You have never seen more joy in a game in your life. And then the self-discipline to not be upset when they were out. They were like capable of all of it. And I was like, are any adults noticing the gorgeous joy and maturity of this little group? We're so quick to be critical of kids for, quote, being immature. And here they were exhibiting this great self-discipline to play correctly, to get out when they were out, to not be bitter or angry. It was glorious. I was like, that's learning. That is learning in action.
Oh, I love it. It feels in a way like going right back to our roots, Julie, with John Holt and
totally
learning all the time.
Absolutely. Thank you, Melissa. You always bring such great energy and such good stories. And we look forward to seeing all of you again next week.
Bye-bye.
You've been listening to the Brave Writer Podcast. I'm Julie Bogart, and Melissa Wiley is my co-host. This podcast is produced by Nova Media with support from team member Jeanette Hall. Thank you for listening and for leaving either a starred or written review on the podcast app of your choice. Anytime you do that, you bring a lot of joy to the team and you support our work. So thanks in advance.